It was not until November 3, 2007, that the then military president, Pervez Musharraf, suddenly thought of doing something unconstitutional and, fulfilling his dream, declared a state of emergency in the country. On the contrary, there were many motives behind it, some of which are as follows. Supreme Court speeds up hearing of missing persons cases. During the coverage of the missing persons cases, I saw tears welling up in the eyes of the then Director General of the FIA. When he was ordered by a bench of the Supreme Court headed by the then Chief Justice Iftikhar Muhammad Chaudhry. If the missing persons are not recovered, they will be held responsible and sent to jail. Since most of the missing persons were from Balochistan province, it had become somewhat common to issue notices to the head of the frontier corps operating in the province, which later continued in one form or another. At one point, the FC was headed by Major General Obadullah Khattak, who later rose to the rank of Lieutenant General. He also complained to the court about such notices. Obadullah Khattak used to face harsh remarks from the judges in the court, and he would walk out of the court without speaking to the media. It was Lieutenant General Obadullah Khattak who was found guilty of corruption, and the army took disciplinary action against him. Nawaz Sharif's sentence over, paving way for repatriation. Pervez Musharraf snatched power from Nawaz Sharif on October 12, 1999 and became the country's uniformed ruler. He elected himself president in a controversial referendum and later ratified the decision in the assemblies. Pervez Musharraf deported Nawaz Sharif, and then a few years later, when the matter reached the Supreme Court, the court lifted the ban on Nawaz Sharif's repatriation and also lifted his sentence in the hijacking case. Pervez Musharraf was not happy with the court's decision. When Nawaz Sharif tried to return to the country, he was sent back abroad from Noor Khan Air Base, Benazir Bhutto Airport, in Rawalpindi. Chairman of Steel Mills Lieutenant General, read Abdul Qayyum's letter to Chief Justice. The country's uniformed President General Musharraf and Iftikhar Muhammad Chaudhry, who was sworn in as Chief Justice under the Constitution, were determined to stop the privatization of Pakistan steel mills. Presidential reference sent. The results of this presidential reference were not encouraging for Musharraf, but he announced his acceptance of the decision. After the incident, the gulf between lawyers, civil society and political activists against the military president and the government under his control deepened, and the country once again began to cloud the uncertainty. Lieutenant General, read Abdul Qayyum, in his capacity as chairman of Pakistan Steel Mills, had written a detailed letter to Chief Justice Iftikhar Muhammad Chaudhry in which he clarified that the privatization of the mill would harm the national interest. Based on this letter, the then Supreme Court had stopped this privatization. According to General Qayyum, some Indian companies were also active behind this privatization, and this matter had become in the national interest. According to him, Shaukat Aziz had persuaded Pervez Musharraf to privatize steel mills. Leaders of Pervez Musharraf's party still complain that behind all this was the then ISI Chief General Ashfaq Parvez Kayani, who later became the army chief. When General Kayani as army chief began the trial of serious treason against Musharraf during the Nawaz Sharif regime, the military circles also started criticizing General Kayani for not playing any role in stopping the trial. There was talk of a psychological war between Pervez Musharraf and Iftikhar Chaudhry. Musharraf had suspended Chief Justice Iftikhar Muhammad Chaudhry on the basis of a letter from lawyer Naeem Bukhari at the time. Later, in the Panama case against former Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif, lawyer Naeem Bukhari was once asked by journalists if he would win the case, to which he replied that the lawyer loses a small case, he loses the client. Pervez Musharraf's confrontation with the judiciary had not yet ended when a dispute arose between the administration of the Lal Masjid and the district administration of the federal capital. Now the media was talking about the writ challenge of the government and the state. In July 2007, a military operation was carried out on the Lal Masjid, and thus the matter reached the Supreme Court. In such a situation, presidential elections were also on the horizon, and Pervez Musharraf as the army chief was adamant to participate in these elections. Presidential candidate Justice Repoters had challenged the issue in the Supreme Court on how a government employee can contest elections. A bench of the Supreme Court has given conditional permission to the then Army Chief Pervez Musharraf to participate in the presidential election in uniform, and at the same time directed the Election Commission not to issue a notification of victory until an application against their eligibility is not decided until. The petition raised two basic questions. The first question was whether Pervez Musharraf could contest the presidential election in uniform, while the second question was whether the same assemblies which had earlier ratified his presidency could re-elect him.